Can you tell? Oh, wow. Can you tell it takes a lot to embarrass me? All right, well, it's good to see you. Good to be with you. You know, I have found through the years that when you're gone somewhere for a week and you come back, it feels like you've been gone 3 weeks. You know what I'm talking about? That's the way it feels tonight. It feels like it's been way more than 2 weeks since I've been here, but it's good to be here. I want to pass along a compliment to you. I was counseling with an individual this afternoon, and toward the end of the session, we had talked quite a bit about with this. I had talked with this person about their faith walk and how they're doing in their relationship with God. And this person is struggling, and so I asked them. I said, "So how are you doing in your relationship with God?" And this person responded by saying, I've really made some good steps. And then the person said, I recently went to Southgate, and it was such a good experience. And that was just good to hear. And I responded to them by saying, yeah, it feels good, doesn't it? And they said, yes, it really does. And I told them I was here and how well you all have received me and how it just feels good. And so you all are doing a lot of things well. Thank you, John, for doing such a good job last week, as you always do. I had a funeral to preach yesterday in West Tennessee yesterday afternoon. On the way, I listened to last Wednesday night's, and what a great job he did, and I hope that information was helpful to you. So I want to set the stage as we get into tonight's lesson. The gist of tonight's subject is for us to stop and think about how easy it is for us to become selfish and self-centered people without ever intending to be that. You know, by nature, we tend to be selfish. And in fact, the Christian life itself is a walk of discipline. It is a walk in which we don't do what is easiest to do. And I had a session with an individual this morning, and she was talking about how difficult something she had been through was. And I said, but you sure are stronger because of it, aren't you? And she said, yeah, very much so. And I said, so is it a good thing or a bad thing? And that's a tough question to answer, because those situations that are hard are not always fun. And in fact, I love Gary Thomas's statement, who wrote the series Sacred Marriage, when he says over and over again, God's purpose for us is not to make us happy, but to make us holy. And that's true, and we can all understand that by realizing that when it's our turn in judgment, we don't really care how hard it was to get to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, as long as we hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I sometimes ask people, are we willing to pray, God, do whatever you need to do to us to get us there? And that kind of makes us cringe a little bit, and we tend to want to feel, in fact I do, I want to say, God, I want to be there so badly, but can you do it the easy way? Well, the easy way is not always what's best. And maybe I'm drifting a little bit, but the point is we have to discipline ourselves. And what we're talking about tonight is disciplining ourselves in relational ways so that we are givers primarily, first and foremost, instead of takers. Now, I want to ask you a question, and I'm obviously not going to ask you to answer this out loud, but on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being low and 10 being high, place your level of self-centeredness or selfishness. And be real with yourself. You're not answering this to me or to your spouse, but put yourself on that spectrum where you think you ought to be. Now, after you have done that, I want to ask you to think about how badly you need to think about and to discuss, as we will discuss tonight, the importance of having a marriage where we are looking more to give than to receive. And the goal of tonight's lesson is for me to convince each of us that when we can get a marriage where we have a husband and a wife who are both significantly more giving than receiving, then we have two very fulfilled people who get most of what they need and want. And what we will see as we go through the material tonight is it's pretty easy to treat somebody like a queen who treats me like a king. And when we can give ourselves up for each other, it doesn't become burdensome, it becomes blessed. And so depending on where you place yourself tonight, identify to what degree you need to work on what we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I like having fun, and I don't know why I think that's funny, but I do. I like to fish, whatever. So tonight we're talking, I know that was completely out of place, wasn't it? I got it so serious and then blew it off. Tonight we're talking about having the ability to understand, communicate, and fulfill each other's needs. And I want you to think about this. Most of us who are married have been married several years, but we're different people than we were when we first started dating. How many of us were exactly like what we were 38 years ago, as in our case, when we dated or married? Our likes are different. What we want to do as hobbies are different. And since each of us has changed, our needs have changed also. Therefore, if I married Tina because she was what I wanted in a partner, what I wanted in an individual who always liked what I liked, if I married her because she always was exactly what I needed, think about what happens. Because if I expect her to fill every part that I need, and that's my mindset, then basically what I'm saying is, all right, as I change, then you've got to change too. Now, I don't know how well that represents this matter of how complicated it is when we have such expectations going into a marriage, when it's all, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to be this, you got to be this. But that's going to be a very difficult relationship to maintain at a very high level, which primarily is my point. However, when the opposite of that is true, when I give myself to doing what I need to do my part, to trying to determine what Tina's needs are, and especially when she does the same, then things are significantly different and so much better. I remember as a little boy hearing my dad as he would preach. I remember from the pulpit in McEwen when he preached there, and we left there when I was in the second grade, so I was young, but I remember him standing there and saying, marriage is more about being the right person than finding the right person. And through the years, as I would hear him say that, I thought, oh, what a neat cliche. That sounds good. But kind of feeling like it's just really kind of cliche-ish. No, it's not. And in fact, when a couple is sitting in the counseling room with me for the first time, oftentimes I will say to them, did you come in here for me to change them or for me to help you change you? Because when a couple comes in, and usually that first session involves them spending an hour telling on each other and getting their venting out. And I understand that's kind of what you're geared up to do. And I usually let them do that before they leave. I'll say, okay, I kind of see what the pieces of the puzzle are now. But what I need to tell you is if you're here for me to change him and you're here for me to change her, we're probably not going to get anywhere, because you can't change her and you can't change him. You can only change you, or I can only change me. However, if you'll let me remind you that you're working on you and you're working on you and let me help, then the odds of us making progress are significantly better. And you know what that's doing? That's taking the expectations down to a much lower level. It's turning it around so that instead of looking to see what we can get and what they need to do, we're looking more at what we need to do and how we can be better for them. And I'm going to keep saying this, but it's so very true. When God can get two people to be givers, then everybody gets what they need and wants and is very fulfilled. We'll continue to say that. The difference between the average ho-hum marriage and those where the two are happily in love and everyone can see it is the marriage where each spouse values being the special person for their spouse. You remember the first night we were talking about marriage and I asked you to think about the ideal couple, the couple that had that marriage that you appreciate, you respect, you see, and you think, wow, what a great relationship they have. That's what I want. Well, when you stop and look at what they have this, don't they? I guarantee you, you did not pick out somebody that doesn't have him looking out for her and her looking out for him. You did not pick somebody or a couple where you had two people who were looking for what they could get instead of what they could give. This is essential. And it is a matter of respect and appreciation. It's like what we were doing when we dated. How hard we would work to try to impress them. Why? Well, we were working harder at giving than receiving. And we're talking about doing it God's way. And I always want to make sure that we look first to see at what He has to say, or at least early in the process. And as John mentioned last week, and as I'll use again, that golden rule, Mom's version, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, for this is the law and the prophets. That principle serves us well. And again, from Acts 20 and verse 35, the reminder that we are happier, more at peace, feeling significantly more fulfilled when we are giving than when we are looking for others to give to us. That's not a cliche either. That's inspired and it's real, and we all have experienced it. We sleep better at night when we have done something during the day for somebody who needs than when we've been selfish and self-centered. And from Ephesians 5, look at this level of unselfishness. Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. In verse 25, husbands, love your wives, and look how high the bar gets here. You know, I'll be honest with you and say, when I read Ephesians 5:25, it's kind of like I turn that off and go, I don't even try to do that. That's not possible. Why? I don't even understand how much Christ loved us to do what He did for us based on what I do sometimes to Him. And so, yeah, it's a high bar. But I think we can understand the point, and that is, oh, how there's no place for selfishness in marriage. And remember the emphasis that I've given to verse 21. Give yourselves up one for another. Submit yourselves one for another. And he doesn't even say that and leave it there. He gives logic behind it by saying, and in doing so, we show reverence to Christ. Man, that bottom part of the statement you have here on screen makes that a really important thing to do, doesn't it? If I tell you tonight you have a way to reverence Christ, I would hope that we would all want to know, ooh, how do we do that? By submitting ourselves to one another, especially in the marriage relationship. Think about troubled marriages. Troubled marriages result in scorekeeping. They result in drifting into I will if you will. They drift into looking for what the other one can do for me, what you're not doing for me. In fact, I want to go back to that, and I want to describe where some of your marriages may be. When resentment begins to build and frustration begins to build, we go from that feeling of closeness and that feeling of unselfishness and that feeling of wanting to do for each other to becoming two people who are looking for little things that become big. Or, probably better yet, when frustration and resentment has built up, we are just kind of sitting back waiting for the other one to step out of line. Why? Well, because we're looking for it, we're frustrated by it. And what happens when couples get to a pretty bad place, it seems like the other one is taking every little thing I do and blowing it out of proportion. Why? We're sitting back just kind of waiting for the other one to mess up. And what happens when a relationship gets to that place? There's just a lot of headbutting that goes on. And there's a lot of resentment and frustration and baggage that builds up. And so that's when we especially have the scorekeeping. Well, I'm not going to if she, or why should I do that when she or when he? And I explained to a wife this morning who was so frustrated, and I said, what we have to do when that's the case is to get some positive momentum going. We've got to get over that hump. Because we all have been there where we feel like I can do nothing wrong. I feel like everything is a big deal. I feel like he or she is just looking. We've all been at different levels of that, and we understand that. And that's going to keep going unless there's some positive momentum. And the way I described that to her this morning was, whatever direction we're going will become magnified if we don't do something to change it. Now, the bad news about that is if we're going in the wrong direction, this resentment and frustration and selfishness is going to keep building and keep building and keep building, and it feeds itself and it gets worse and worse and worse, oftentimes until something crashes and burns. However, the positive side of that is when things get going in a positive direction and we're trying, it becomes easier to try. We notice more, we love more, we respect more, we even forgive more. And especially when we understand that God helps us along, when we're doing what we ought to do, that positive momentum is very important. So, fulfilling your spouse's needs can also gain back sometimes, not always, but sometimes his or her love. It's not at all unusual for me to get a call or to have someone make an appointment by themselves, similar as I did this morning. And they come in and they say, my marriage is not very good. We need help. You know, and I always go, ooh, it's hard to do marriage counseling with one person. And oftentimes, especially because men don't love coming into a counseling room, at least at first, oftentimes they will come by themselves, and I'll say, how can we get him or her sometimes to come? What can we do so that we can work on this together? And sometimes they refuse to come. They will not. Usually what I say in that situation is this. My advice to you is to pour yourself out, giving yourself up for him or for her. You do everything you can to fulfill their needs. You do everything you can to be unselfish. You do everything you can to worship the ground they walk on. Now, Jesus said it this way, in doing so, you'll heap coals of fire on their head. And I think what he meant by that is you'll get their attention. And how I would say that in this context is what I said earlier. It's hard to ignore somebody who's treating you like a king. especially if it continues when he is not treating her like a queen. If you want to prove your love to somebody who's not treating you well, love them when they're not treating you well and see if that doesn't get their attention. Now, I realize I'm standing before you talking theory instead of reality, and I realize the reality makes it extremely difficult to be that loving to someone who's not providing love in return. But when people come and are desperate to try to save their marriage, they're willing to do things that are not easy to do oftentimes. And I think looking to fulfill needs is a great way to get their attention. But remember, it's not my goal for one of you to be fulfilling the other's needs. It's, in fact, not my goal at all. It's God's goal for us to be fulfilling each other's needs. And when both are committed to meeting the needs of one another, both love each other for who they are, for what they do out of love for the other, and it just feeds upon itself. The challenge is to get it started. Now, I want to go back again and just call your attention to what happened when you were dating that caused you to so fall in love with each other. We were the most unselfish, I will do anything people for you that we have been at any point in life other than maybe when babies come along. And at that point it's completely different because it's necessary. Our feeling is wanting to do that anyway, but when we met that special person and we were trying so very hard, there was very little selfishness going on. Why? Because we were trying so very hard. We didn't have the attitude, what can he or she do for me? We had the attitude, what can I do to impress? And my question is, do we love each other more, or is our love at a more mature, higher level today than it was 30 years ago, 10 years ago? I hope so. It may be masked by the frustration and resentment, but I think the love that we have as years pass and as we work through things becomes deeper, even sometimes when we don't realize it. And when we dated, was it an easy mindset to have? Sure it was. Why? Because we wanted their attention. We wanted the relationship. I don't think it has to be difficult now either if we want it badly enough. So I want to not only identify the problems as we go through this, but I want to give you ways to deal with them. Now, I'm going to provide you a tool that Tina and I use with couples often, and I'll give the disqualifier on the front end. This is an academic thing. It is a thing that somebody who for years did institutional research would do. I realize that. I'm going to give you a normal person version later too, but it's all for the purpose of helping us to do a better job of being unselfish and understanding and communicating each other's needs. And it's what I call needs list. And I will risk the matter of being more personal than I ought to by saying this didn't come from his needs and her needs. It's something that Tina and I decided to do many years ago when we felt ourselves in that place where we were so coexisting. And in fact, since I've started, I'll run a little bit with it and say there was one particular night that I went to Tina and I said, "What do you need from me? I don't feel like I'm fulfilling your needs." And when I asked that, she looked at me like, "Who are you and what'd you do with my husband?" And she said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "Give me 5 things you need from me." And so she thought about it and she said one and I wrote it down. And then I said, "What's number 2?" And she did, and we went down through 5 needs. And then she said, "What do you need from me?" And she said, "Let me have the legal pad." Well, I wasn't doing it for her to do that. But when she said that, I thought, well, I need this. and I need this. And so when we got down through 4 or 5 for me, I said to her, next Sunday night, I'm going to ask you to grade me on each of these 5 and tell me how well I did this week. Now, I told you it's a little academic, educational research, right? And she looked at me like, I don't know who this guy is. Well, the next Sunday night, I got my yellow sheet out, and before we went to bed, I said, how did we do? How did I do on number 1, with 1 being low and 5 being high? And she thought about it, and she gave me a score, and I said number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And then she said, how well did I do? And so I graded her. And I then said, thank you for sharing that with me. What's different this week? How would you change your needs list? And so we talked about them, and for 2 or 3 years, on every Sunday night, we would go through that process. Now, you may go, wow, that's kind of exceptional or weird, or I don't care what you think it worked. Because what it did is cause us to quit focusing on ourselves and to focus on the other. But you know what happened? It got to the point where we didn't know what to put down on our needs list because we had trained each other to so think of the other one that we just kind of habitually became pretty good at thinking other person instead of myself. Now, we mess up a lot. We're not perfect. But I want to tell you, it changed how we cared for each other. Now, we still have a needs list today, a lot of years later. We don't redo them every Sunday night. And in fact, it's been several months since we have redone our needs list. But since that night, many years ago, until tonight, had you come to us at any point and asked us, where's your needs list? We could go right to it. In fact, Tina's needs list right now is on my chest in our bedroom. My needs list is in Tina's vanity drawer that she pulls over every morning. Now, again, I realize I'm probably stepping over some lines here talking about us. But what I want to tell you is we were so out there doing our thing. We were thinking about keeping score. We were thinking about how we sometimes were not getting what we wanted and being fulfilled in the way we wanted to. But a simple little tool that didn't take an awful lot of time did it. Now, this is a personality type thing, I realize. I've had people to say, I just can't do that. And I kind of want to smack them when they say that. What I really want to say is you have no idea what you're missing. But I realize we're geared differently. We're wired differently. So I've pretty much gone ahead. It is the needs list, how it works. Each spouse writes down 3 to 5 things. When I'm working with couples now, I usually do 3, especially depending on what they are and how big they are. It's oftentimes hard to focus on 5 pretty significant needs. After spending time writing, each discusses his or her needs, providing clarity. When I'm working with a couple, I will ask them what they need, and when she says, I need this, I'll turn to him and I'll say, in your own words, what did she say? And he'll go, well, she said she needs me to do this. And sometimes she'll say, well, that's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm really saying is I need you to do this. And I'll go back to him and I'll say, so try again. And he'll say it, and if he gets it right, then we'll go on to the next one. But you know what's happening? What's happening is that couple is talking and understanding differently than how we usually talk about what we need. Because how we usually talk about what we need is when we get frustrated enough to the point that we're ready to confront them. And when we do, we're frustrated, we're resentful, we're mad, and we say things like, you never, or I wish you were more like, and those discussions don't go very well. But this discussion where 2 people realize they want to be closer and they want to understand each other better, they're communicating, they're understanding, they have a focus. It's not rocket science, but it works. Now let me add one more thing before I get back to flying through slides, and that is this. Needs on needs list need to be behavioral. They need to be something the other person can do. That makes it tricky because a lot of our needs are not behavioral. They are feeling and thinking needs. For example, when a couple comes in and one of them's had an inappropriate relationship and they are working on it and they may be weeks and months into it, one of the needs the person who had the relationship has is, I need her or I need him to trust me. Well, you can't trust somebody just by trying harder. It doesn't work that way. Now, there are behaviors that we can tie to that feeling that help that process along. But we can change our behavior by what we do. So if you see the need of this and the importance of it and are willing to do it, and in fact, if you are, I'll make a guarantee to you tonight. If you all go home tonight and do a needs list and do it well and focus on it for 2 weeks, I promise you the next 2 weeks will be the best 2 weeks you've had in a long time. I promise you that. I've never seen that not happen. Why? Because the more we are giving ourselves for the other, the better we are. So, you see the process. Number 3, after a week or 2 weeks, spouses sit and honestly tell each other how well they did. And watch this. If your spouse says, I'd give you a 4, and in fact, when I'm working with a couple, if she says, oh, I'd give you a 4 out of 5 on that, my first question is, what did he do well? So ask your spouse, what did I do well? And she may say, man, I loved it when you took out the trash. I loved it when you did this. I loved it when you did that. You know what they're doing? Reinforcing positive behavior. Pavlov and Skinner were pretty well right. When we reinforce positive behavior, the behavior increases. When we brag on people for doing something well, they like it. They tend to do it well more often. And then, because I've gotten the positive out first, then I say, what could he have done to have made it a 5? And she will say, I loved it that you took out the trash. You know, there was one day that the kids were doing this, and I really could have used your help. And you know what? Sometimes he will say, man, I'm sorry, I didn't even realize that. You know what's happening? They're talking. They're understanding. They're communicating without screaming at each other out of frustration. Man, it sounds good when you talk about it, doesn't it? It does, and it works. The challenge I get is telling all this and doing it well enough to encourage you to go home and do it. And I realize that. I'll give you the easier version in a minute. And what do? Well, you keep redoing them. And it's not just identifying the needs list. The more important part of it actually is the scoring of the needs list, because that's when you get the better understanding and the talk. Now, some suggestions for needs list. When I work, or when Tina and I work with a young couple who have young children, and we try to get them to do needs lists, you know what the young mothers say? I don't have a clue. I don't know where to start. You know why? Because young mothers have lost themselves and have become such givers, they don't even really know what they need anymore in receiving. Because they are providing for everybody and they don't have time to provide for themselves. And Tina and I just look at each other and kind of laugh when we have a young mother who says, I don't know where to start, and we go, we knew that. Now, that's not always the case, but often it is. So part of the reason I do this is just to tell you what we hear over and over again. So they must be behavioral, cannot be feelings or emotions, because we can't always completely change those. If you're having trouble thinking of what you would put on your needs list, think of it as a wish list. Oh man, I wish he would, or I wish she would. So what are the challenges? First challenge is understanding or assuming that I understand his or her needs and how to fulfill them. This is a fun thing to do when you're counseling, to ask him, do you know what she needs? And he always says yes, and I go, oh, what? And he doesn't even get through the first one completely before she's going, no. But we all tend to think we know it. Challenge number 2, knowing what our needs are. Challenge number 3, some of us don't express our feelings as easily and verbalize thoughts as well as others. For some of us, it's hard to turn our thoughts into words. Another challenge is assuming if I need it, then you should need it too. For men, oftentimes, I don't think I can get that touchy-feely. That's not who I am. Sometimes we think, well, that's a ridiculous need. That's crazy. Well, remember, it's not up to you to determine her needs or you to determine his needs. It's always a challenge to take time to do it. Oftentimes, a big challenge is that we've been married long enough, just having conversation like that feels awkward. So think of it as a wish list. If I could get him or her to do anything in the world for me, what would it be? If there were one that he or she could do for me, one thing that would make me happy, what would it be? And so I want to give you some examples of what I hear all the time. Tina and I always encourage people to put on their needs list as one of their needs spiritual encouragement from each other. I don't care who we are. If we are married, we need spiritual encouragement from our spouses. We don't have to be the spiritual leader, or we don't have to be the spouse who's not the spiritual leader. If you're not the spiritual leader in your family, in your marriage, then make it easy for your spouse to be the spiritual leader. Spiritual encouragement. I'm running out of time. In fact, let me give 2 or 3 ways of doing that real quick. Text of a Bible verse. Driving down the road and saying things like, look at the beautiful sky that God gave us today. Passing along a thought that somebody has passed to you. It doesn't have to be 3 chapters of a book read every night. It doesn't have to be reading through the Bible every year, which I don't want to do anything at all to downplay how important it is for us to spend that time and to do it together. But we can be spiritual with each other in so many ways that are so easy if we just recognize the need. Example of her needs, taking time to talk about the day and things in general. You know, if you're a wife, you're really unusual if you don't just long for your husband to just sit for a couple of minutes at the end of the day and talk. I just see it over and over and over again. How very important that is. Wives need that so much. It says so much. You care about me. You're willing to share with me. You're interested in me. Number 3, she almost always puts help around the house, sometimes kitchen, sometimes something as simple. I always get wives looking at their husbands when I put this one up. Something as simple as, oh, I just need you to rub my back. She often will say, I need you to show appreciation. I need you to tell me I'm important to you. Oftentimes the need will be, I need help with the children. Sometimes it's as simple as, tell me that you love me. I've seen wives say, I just need you to pay attention to me when I talk to you. I need to feel like what I say to you matters. Date nights, asking me out without the children. Sometimes alone time, especially for those young mothers. Oh, can I just have 5 minutes to myself? Will you just take the kids? Can I just have an hour to get away? I'll be good after that. Sometimes, oftentimes, she will say, I need affection, and then she'll start backing up, making sure, not that she's not interested in sexual affection, she is, but her need so many more times is, I need you to show me that I'm important to you for something other than sexual relationship. In a non-sexual way of providing affection is a good way to do this. So what does he have on his needs list? He needs spiritual encouragement. Most always, somehow he will also have the affection, but it's a little different than what she needs. Even though she needs that too, we could talk more about the differences between male and female in the sexual relationship. He also needs praise and appreciation. He often needs her to be interested in what he's interested in. Sometimes alone time for hobbies, sometimes special meals. And before I get to the watered-down version, let me tell you a funny story. I was doing this years ago, talking about the needs list in West Tennessee. And we had a break between the session. In fact, I had talked about needs list earlier, came back the next day, and I had a 90-year-old man, jolliest, neatest man you've ever seen, that came up to me, and he called me preacher. I won't ever forget that. He said, "Preacher, that needs list thing works." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, you want me to tell you about it?" And I said, "Sure," thinking, oh, I have no idea where this is going. He said, "You know what that needs list got me today?" I'm making the elders nervous right now, aren't I? He said, "You know what that needs list got me today?" And I said, "No, what?" He said, "My favorite pie." She made me my favorite pie. And I said, "I'm so glad that made you happy, didn't you?" So here's the watered down version. If your personality type is not such that you're willing to do a list of 5 things and do a Likert scale type item on each of those and put them in an Excel spreadsheet and all the above, then simply ask each other, what do I need to work on that's important to you? Or, what could I do that would make you go, wow? That's really nice. Now, even a good marriage ought to have this kind of conversation in it. And so my challenge for you tonight is, if you're not willing or are not the type to sit down and put in writing before you go to bed tonight, take advantage of the time we have had together tonight by focusing and working to do more like God wants us to do, to submit ourselves one to another, to be givers more than receivers. And remember, when I started the session on marriage, I said, how important is it to you to have a strong marriage? It's not going to happen just by sitting here and listening. It happens by putting forth effort, and it is worth it. So I hope tonight will encourage each of us to be reminded that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Tonight we offer the invitation, wanting to encourage those who have not yet become Christians to put on Christ. And if you need the prayers of this church or want to ask for the forgiveness of those, even of this church, we'd encourage you to come while together we stand and sing.